Welcome everyone to Pathways Through the Orchard. Tonight we start a new book, the fifth book of the Chumash, Deuteronomy, Devarim. Devarim means literally words. And so today we sent out our weekly numerical gems and discussing the idea that words that come from the heart enter the heart. This is an expression in the Talmud, and this exemplifies the entire book of Deuteronomy, that these are the words of Moshe coming from his heart to enter into the heart of that whole generation that was about to come into Eretz Yisrael, as well as every Jew in every generation. Moshe is speaking to us. And you'll see, for those who take advantage of our numerical gems in the Torah, that the key here is that the entire book of Devarim happens in 37 days. It says explicitly that he began to speak on the first day of the month of Shvat, and he passed away 37 days later. And that is the secret of Halev. 37 equals the heart. So everyone is welcome to check in on the numerical gems in the Torah. There is something unique about this book, and that is what we're going to explore tonight. That the syntax of the book of Devarim, is completely different than the first four books. In the first four books, especially we'll say once Moshe is introduced, so it says actually 70 different times, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. And God spoke to Moshe saying, and then the mitzvot are given over. This book, we don't have that expression. And therefore, the sages said that the book of Devarim is from Moshe. Moshe is the one speaking out the entire book, and therefore you don't have over and over again, and God spoke to Moshe saying, there's approximately 100 mitzvot in the book of Devarim. Even though it's called Mishnah Torah, that's actually in Latin, that's what Deuteronomy means. It's like going back over a second time. It's called Mishnah Torah, a review of the Torah. But in a certain way, it's almost a misnomer, even though it's called that, and there's a certain truth to that. Of the 100 mitzvot, 30 are repeated. You have this idea of Mishnah Torah, but there's 70 new mitzvot that do not appear in the first four books. So it's not completely true that it's only a review. There's many, many new mitzvot and new ideas that are revealed in the book of Deuteronomy, but the language, it's all Moshe speaking. He's the one speaking out the whole book. At the end of the book, there is a number of times where it does say that God came to Moshe and told him certain things. But that's only at the end. Virtually the whole book, it says it's in Moshe's language. So we need to understand, it says, Mipi atzmo, from his own mouth, Moshe's own mouth. So this leads to a question. We always assume that the whole Torah is transmitted by God. How do we understand that the whole book of Deuteronomy is coming from Moshe? So that's what we want to understand. So the book actually begins And this is something dealt with in the other orchard series, where Moshe actually begins with, we'll call it a hidden rebuke, that he couches his language very carefully, but he mentions in coded language, excuse me, many of the different sins that were done in the desert. But already in the third verse, so it says like this, and this is like the key verse that we're going to be looking at. It says, "Vayihi ba'arba'im shana ba'ashtei asar chodesh be'achad l'chodesh," and it was in the 40th year, in the 11th month, on the first day of the month, as we said before, Rosh Chodesh Shvat, Diber Moshe el Bnei Yisrael kechol asher tziva Hashem oto aleihem. That Moshe spoke to Bnei Yisrael according to all that God had commanded him to say to them. So this is a key verse here, because we already introduced the idea that it's Moshe who is speaking the book of Devarim, and it's coming from his language, and we'll discuss that in a minute. But if in the verse that we just read, it says he began to speak according to everything that God had commanded him to speak. So all of a sudden, there's a unity here. It's not just Moshe speaking whatever he wants to speak. It's Moshe speaking what God had told him to speak, but only in general. In other words, when we go through the book of Devarim, and I should mention some of the gems of the Torah are in the book of Devarim. Some of the most important ideas, verses, concepts are in the book of Devarim. And this is Moshe giving it over. But I want to explain according to the Ramban. This is a major question that we're talking about, how to understand that the fifth book of the Torah is different than the first four, but it's not just Moshe giving over whatever he wants. That's the verse we just read, that he began to speak according to everything that God had told him. So this is what the Ramban says. The Ramban says the following thing. He quotes this verse and says that especially the 70 mitzvot that we haven't heard yet, where is this coming from? Is if it's coming from Moshe, is it coming from Moshe, or is it coming from God? So the Ramban clarifies, and he says that all of the mitzvot in the Torah were given over to Moshe at Har Sinai, and also from the Mishkan in the first year of leaving Egypt, and into the second year when the Mishkan was put up and became a permanent fixture of Jewish service. So he said all of the mitzvot that are going to be revealed in the book of Devarim were already revealed to Moshe. It's just that they hadn't been enunciated yet. They had not been, it's not even that they haven't been taught, but they haven't been revealed in the Torah itself. And so that's how he explains what it says, that Moshe began to speak all of the things that God had commanded him to speak. Because when he was originally taught the mitzvot, the assumption, that's what it means, the verse, Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe lemor. And God spoke to Moshe saying. So everyone asks, what is the word saying there? It sounds almost redundant. And God spoke to Moshe. What does it mean? God spoke to Moshe saying. So the literal understanding is God spoke to Moshe with the intent that Moshe would say it to the people. So this is what the Ramban is trying to clarify here, of what it means according to all that God had commanded him. So these are mitzvot that were already taught to Moshe, and for whatever reason, they had not been taught to all of Israel in the Torah itself. Then he says another thing. He says that the mitzvot, there are approximately 30 mitzvot that have been given over already. And here in this parsha, it says, V'ho'il Moshe. And Moshe began to clarify, meaning that there's a number of times in the Torah where a mitzvah is repeated a number of times, but each time new information is given over. It's not given over at once. In last week's parsha, one of the big subjects was the cities of refuge. Well, that was I believe, the third time that the Torah is talking about the cities of refuge. But each time, new concepts, new laws are given over about it. So here he's saying that even the mitzvot that Moshe had already given over, now he's clarifying in a more clear manner. And then he makes another point, and this is crucial to our discussion, and that is that even though everything in the book of Devarim is not on the level of God told him exactly what to say, that Moshe did take a certain initiative here and gave over certain ideas along with the mitzvot. And later, when God did command Moshe to finish writing down the Torah, he then, like the first 4 books, he transcribed what Moshe should write. And the beautiful thing, the amazing thing is that God commanded him to write exactly what he had given over. And so here, this is kind of getting to the crux of what I want to share here, is that when we say that Moshe spoke out the Torah, just one second, I'm just going to clarify the video here. Yeah. It means, like it says in Pirkei Avot, make his will your will, in order that he can make your will his will. And this is, in a sense, I won't say the answer, but the solving of the paradox between free will and God's omniscience and hashgacha pratit, his providence, the greatest paradox that we have. But when we make his will our will, and God helps us make our will his will, then they mesh together. And so here's Moshe giving over in his own language even though the mitzvah were already commanded to him. But he's giving it over later when God says, okay, now it's time to write down the book of Devarim. It is exactly what Moshe had said. And that's like the ultimate idea. On a human level, and it's not exactly the same thing, but we can relate to it in the following way. A lot of times, someone's learning or listening to a class and is like one step ahead of the teacher. This actually happens often. You see here, everyone is muted right now, but we have chats. And as I'm speaking, so people are commenting, and sometimes the comments are like one step ahead of the next thing I'm going to say. And so that's this idea of the synchronicity of being in tune with the Torah. Or someone is learning and they have a question in the text. Like there's something about the verse that just it needs explanation. They go to Rashi. Rashi asks the same question. And so we're told you're in good company. When that happens, you're in very, very good company because you figured out the Rashi even before reading the Rashi. So here it's Moshe is so in tune with God's will that it's coming from him, but the expression is that the Shekhinah spoke through the throat of Moshe. The Shekhinah spoke through the throat of Moshe. He was a pure channel. Now, in the first 4 books, Moshe is also a channel, but it's more like Vayedaber Hashem el Moshe limor. And God spoke to Moshe saying, and God dictated. God told him exactly what to say and exactly what to write. Here, we're talking on a level of prophecy, on a level of divine inspiration, that Moshe was able to intuit exactly what God wanted him to give over. Now, this is connected to the 13 principles of faith of Maimonides. The 13 principles of faith, the first 5 have to do with different articles of faith that have to do really with God. Belief in God, in the oneness of God, that God has no body or any physical description, that only God is the one to pray to, that he is the first and he is the last. These are the first 5. And then there are, depending how you want to count it, there are 3 or 4 of the principles of faith that have to do with prophecy. So I'm going to read them. The 6th principle of Maimonides is Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shlema Shekol Divrei Nevi'im Emet. I believe with a complete faith that all the words of the the prophets are true. The next one is Ani Ma'amin Be'emunah Shlema Shenevuat Moshe Rabbeinu Alav Shalom Haita Amitit V'Shehu Haya Av LeNevi'im LeKodmim LeFanav UleBa'im Acharav. I believe with a complete faith in the prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu that it is absolutely true, and that he was we'll call it the father or the archetypal of all of the prophets that came before him or after him. In other words, our whole belief system is based on that when it says Vayadaber Hashem el Moshe lemor, that Moshe was the proper channel, the proper vehicle for God's words as they appear in the Torah. Then the next one is Ani ma'amin be'emunah shlema shekol Torah amitzuya ata biyadenu hi anetuna leMoshe Rabbeinu alav shalom. I believe with a complete faith that the entire Torah, that's including the book of Devarim, that we have in our hands was given to Moshe, that Moshe was the prophetic channel through which God is speaking to the Jewish people and the entire world. So here we see, and the next one also is somewhat connected to prophecy also. So here we see anywhere from 25 to 33% of all of the principles of faith have to do with our belief in the truth of the words of the prophets. Now, all the other prophets, and Maimonides explains this at length in other places, and the Ramchal, Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, also explains this at great depth, that it's actually based on the Talmud, that explains that when we read the words of Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Zechariah, Micha, and all of them, they gave it over, like we're talking about here, Moshe. It was in their own language. In other words, they received this clear prophecy, and sometimes it's God tells the prophet, tell the people X, Y, and Z. But in great measure, the prophet has a prophetic vision that is that's clear, but then translates it into his own, I'll call it even poetic, creative, allegorical language. And that's why each one of the prophets, if you really delve into it, there's very different nuances in the way the prophecies are given over. And this, the Talmud explains, is true of all of the prophets. The exception is Moshe, but the exception is really the book of Devarim, because here Moshe also, very similar to all the other prophets, has a clear vision of what God wants him to say, what he wants him to give over, but it's in his own language. That's why the whole book, it's Moshe speaking. As I said previously, you don't have over and over again, and God spoke to Moshe saying, God spoke to Moshe telling him, now I want you to tell the people this, that, or the other thing. So this is a very, very important idea. Now I want to take it one step further. And this is a beautiful idea. One of the concepts that we've discussed many, many times in many different contexts is the idea of inter-inclusion, where you have different ideas, but they're all inter-included one in the other. They enclose one and the other. The example we always bring is Sfira to Omer, where usually when we talk about the Sfira, we talk about Chesed, we talk about Gevura, we talk about Teferet. But in Sfira to Omer, we talk about Chesed, Sheba Chesed, Gevura Sheba Chesed, Teferet Sheba Chesed. And then we realize that each of the Sfirot has all the other Sfirot in them. But this is true of all of reality. All of reality is enclosing different levels of reality. Excuse me, I'm just getting over a bit of a cold here, so you'll excuse all of the coughing. Here we have a beautiful idea of inter-inclusion. In one sense, the book of Devarim is part of the written Torah. The written Torah is really the 5 books. The rest of the Torah, the prophets and the writings, are in a different level. They're coming through divine inspiration, the way that they are written. The prophets, it came through prophecy, but the way they're writing it is divine inspiration. And so the 5 books are the written Torah, and they're coming from God. But here in the 5th book, we have an inter-inclusion of oral Torah, because it's Moshe who's giving this over. And then God at the end comes and confirms everything that Moshe gave over orally from his own mouth, and it becomes part of the written Torah. So that's a very, very important understanding of the whole book that we're just starting this week, and we'll run through the rest of the year. It's really a unification of the oral Torah becoming the written Torah, or because of the verse that we learned before is that Moshe is giving over everything that God commanded him to give over. So Moshe is already intuiting everything that would be written, but it's still coming through him. So here it's like a perfect unity of the written Torah and the oral Torah. And this is connected to an important teaching from Rabbi Nachman, who says a person should make their Torah into tefillah. And it follows that we should make our tefillah into Torah. So what does that mean? Rabbi Nachman was expressing that we should take our Torah and turn it into tefillah, meaning whatever we're learning, that at the same time we should be praying to be able to integrate it, to manifest it, to understand it. And so instead of just learning, we're turning our learning into a prayer that whatever we're learning can become real. Let's say we're learning about Mashiach. So instead of just learning about Mashiach, at the same time, we're actually praying that all of these traditions will be able to see and experience. And the opposite is, how do you turn tefillah into Torah? We do that by studying the prayers. We're used to just saying the prayers, but there's also a level of studying. Where did the prayer come from? Who wrote it? Why these words? The order of the tefillot, the deeper kavanot of the tefillot, certain meditations that we can have during the tefillah. We turn our prayer into Torah as we study it in order to find deeper dimensions in the prayers themselves. Now here we see that there are 7 mitzvot, and this is a very, very good example. There's 7 mitzvot that come from the rabbis, but in 6 of the 7, we say a bracha, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, asher kiddishanu b'mitzvotav, as if God commanded us in the Torah, that you have made us holy in his mitzvot. Well, but these mitzvot are from the rabbis. But the rabbis, because they found what are called supports in the Torah for this, but not even always. For example, when we read the Megillah, of Purim. Well, that story happens approximately 900 years after Sinai. And yet we make a bracha, Asher kiddeshanu b'mitzvotav vitzivanu, and you have commanded us. Well, the rabbis commanded us. So here we see, again, an inter-inclusion that these 7 mitzvot are considered as if they're coming from the written Torah. So there's an inter-inclusion here. The 7 mitzvot, very, very quickly, there's an acronym, Na b'simcha, Nun ayin, and then the word simcha. Nun is netilat yadayim, washing hands. Ayin is eruv, making connecting a community through an eruv. B'simcha, the bet is for brachot. That's the exception, because we only say Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Melech Haolam, and then whatever we're eating or blessing. We're not saying Asher Kiddeshanu. Those are brachas. The shin is Shabbat candles. The mem is Megillah. The chet is Chanukah, and the hey is Hallel. Those are the 7 mitzvot that the rabbis have given it the power as if it's from the written Torah. So I'm only bringing that up just to show this idea of inter-inclusion, like we're trying to include the oral Torah with the written Torah. So the rabbis are the oral Torah, but they inter-included these mitzvot, as I said, as if they were commanded in the Torah itself. And then we have also the idea of how a minhag can become a halacha. There's an expression, minhag kehalacha. There's certain customs that the Jewish people throughout history, we don't have time to go into it right now, but adopted certain minhagim. And when everyone started doing it, the rabbis turned them into halachas. They became obligatory. This is a very tricky area, very, very tricky, because many things that people think are halacha, even to this day, are just minhag, are just custom. And so a lot of people get mixed up between what is custom and what is halacha. That's a whole other discussion. So here, just to summarize before we go on to the next insight, we have just a beautiful idea of the whole book of Devarim being this almost seamless unity or inter-inclusion between written Torah and the oral Torah, between Moshe giving it over from his own heart, like we say, words from the heart enter the heart, and the idea that ultimately these are the very words that God wanted Moshe to say, intended for him to say. So here we see that the prophecy of Moshe, like we saw in the Principles of Faith of the Rambam, is that the prophecy of Moshe is like on a level of no other prophet. But yet here we see that Moshe also is giving it over in his own words, in his own style. And as we said, the Talmud talks about this, that even though the prophecies that the prophets got were clear, and it was totally clear to them what God wanted them to give over, but nonetheless, through their own creative imaginations, they were able to turn them into allegories, into parables that the people could understand. Because when they received the prophecy, it was, and I'm sure everyone's experienced this at different times, where we'll have a moment of clarity. We don't hear any words, we don't see any pictures, and it doesn't even come through to us in words. It just, something becomes clear to us. And then after a few minutes of thought, we're able to express it in words. But it's not like these very words were given to us in the moment of clarity. The moment of clarity, it's beyond words. And sometimes it's even beyond thought, at least normative thought. It's just, there's a moment of, the best word I can think of is clarity, where something becomes absolutely fixed in the truth of what we are experiencing. And then sometimes it takes a long time to then translate that into a language, or even a consciousness of what we've received. Okay, now for the second insight is the idea that there are certain parshas that were established to always come before certain holidays or events. And there are not that many of them, but one of them is, we always read Parsha Devarim before Tisha B'Av. And many reasons are given over. One is the rebuke at the beginning of the Parsha and during the Parsha as well, because these are days of rebuke and tragedy and sin in Jewish history. But also the Shabbos before Tisha B'Av. In other words, this coming Shabbos will be Parshat Devarim. The following Monday will be Tisha B'Av. Monday night and Tuesday, I believe. So Devarim will always come right before Tisha B'Av. And that Shabbos, we read a special Haftorah. And it's the Chazon of Yeshayahu, of Isaiah. And it's actually called Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev gave over a very well-known teaching, but we really need to try to understand it. He said, why is it called Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision? Actually, the beginning of Yeshayahu is full of rebuke. It's a vision of rebuke. And we read it before Tisha B'Av. The following week is Parshat Nachamu. Always the next week after Tisha B'Av will be Parshat Ve'etchanan and Shabbat Nachamu. Console my people. Also from Isaiah. So Rabbi Levi Yitzchak said that on Shabbat Chazon, every person is granted a vision of the third temple. That's what he said. That everyone is granted a vision of the third temple. Now the question is, do we pick up on it? Are we aware of it? Are we conscious of it? Are we like looking for it so that it can happen? So that's, in a certain way, a different matter. It's just like, let's say Shabbat comes and some people plug into Shabbat and some people don't. but Shabbat is there. So it's the same thing. This vision is there for the taking. So obviously, Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berdichev gives this over to encourage us. If this vision is available, then take advantage of it. Try to visualize it. But we want to understand this a little bit deeper. We want to understand this a bit deeper. And a lot of this, what I'm going to give over, is from a Torah I learned from Rav Ginsburg. So he says, very simply, he brings a statement in Pirkei Avot. Eze chacham haro'eh hanolad. Who is the wise person? The one who sees nolad. It literally means birthing. From the word yeled, laholid, to give birth. What does it mean? The wise person is the one who can see from present, current situation what will come from it, like cause and effect. Right now, something is happening in our life, and we have enough wisdom to see what's going to be born from this. What are going to be the consequences of what is happening? So that's from Pirkei Avot. This idea of the wise person is one who can see into the future. So that's what Rabbi Levi Yitzchak is saying. That on this Shabbos, Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision, the vision is there. The vision is there, but we have to be wise enough to grasp it. So Rav Ginsburg brings another verse, actually from the book of Devarim, where the Jewish people are called Am Chacham V'Navon, a wise and understanding people. So Rav Ginsburg is saying that this idea from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev is not just for the tzaddikim. Everyone has the ability to have a vision of the third temple. So, but what does that mean, a vision of the third temple? So obviously it's talking about a vision of the future, a vision of a rectified future, a vision of Mashiach, a world of peace, a world of unity and harmony. That's really what Levi Yitzchak is talking about, not just the third temple, but trying to see this vision that the Jewish people have held on for thousands of years. It was the prophets of Israel who gave over the first universal vision of mankind. That was one of their greatest contributions that Judaism has made to the world, is that ultimately we will live in a world of peace. That is, it's in the program. The world is hardwired that redemption will come, rectification will come, healing, love, harmony between all peoples. And we've held on to this vision for literally thousands of years, through terrible times, through thick and thin. And this is connected to one of, if you really think about it, it's a bit of a startling statement, but the sages say that Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. So one might think, of all days for Mashiach to be born on Tisha B'Av, when we're sitting on the floor and mourning and fasting, but that's exactly the point. That's exactly the point. That's who is the wise one? The one who can see from current, let's say, problems, challenges, the possibilities that will come from it. So the sages make a point of saying Mashiach will be born on Tisha B'Av because the exile, the tragedies, the everything the Jewish people have gone through is part of a process that will lead to Mashiach, even though it's taken far longer than anyone would want it to take. The belief is there, the vision is there. And so this is an encouragement, especially here in Israel. In another hour, we begin the 9 days. And this has halachic parameters to it and reality to it. But psychologically and spiritually and emotionally, the 9 days is a very heavy time. And current events, if you could orchestrate them to be happening it's like God has somewhat of a sense of humor here that our reality right now is so much the 3 weeks, so much the 9 days, as here we sit in Israel waiting for, if you don't mind me saying, all hell to break loose. That is the feeling here. We're just sitting here waiting for all hell to break loose. But who is the wise one? The one who sees this is part of a bigger picture. Is part of a bigger picture, and that redemption and rectification will come from all of this. So this is connected very, very much to this idea of what's called drawing the future into the present. One of the words for future in Hebrew is atid. Future, atid. And this word appears in Megillat Esther when the Haman and Achashverosh originally had sent out that there was a certain day on which they were going to, chas v'shalom, try to kill all the Jews. It's almost like right now. Iran has announced they are going to attack Israel. Haman and Achashverosh announced that we are going to destroy the Jews. The parallels are actually startling. And it's no coincidence that Persia is Iran. It's no coincidence. And so in Megillat Esther, after Esther orchestrates Haman being killed and Achashverosh being willing to cancel the decree, but he said, I can't cancel the decree because once a decree has gone out from the king, it can't be brought back. But a new decree could be sent out. So they sent out a new decree telling the people to be ready for this day and defend yourselves. So the word used is to be ready, to be prepared, is atidim, the same word as future. And so it's explained in Kabbalah and Hasidut how, and actually in quantum physics as well, and physics, how the future is already prepared in the present. The future is already prepared in the present. And that's the secret of prophecy. The secret of prophecy is God grants the prophet a vision of the future in the present. Usually it's a possibility, because we learn that all of the, we'll call them bad prophecies, did not have to happen. It was only if the people didn't change their ways. And all the prophets said that clearly. God wants you to change your ways, wants you to be righteous, wants Israel to create a just society. But if it doesn't happen, this is what's going to happen. And so it didn't have to happen, but it was already prepared. But they had the vision to give it over in the present. That is what prophecy is. And interestingly enough, the past is also found in the present. How do we know that? Is because most of us spend a good part of every day thinking in the present about the past. In other words, we use the present thinking about the past. And actually, the word for past in Hebrew, avar, is the same as ibur, is pregnant. In other words, just like the Ari taught this idea that sometimes a soul enters into a soul from the other world will enter into a person to help that person or to have their own rectification. So it's something from the past becomes impregnated in the present. And so this is the secret of understanding time, that the 4 letters of God's name, a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and a Hey, are the letters of how we relate to time. Haya, Hoveh, Yiyeh. Past, present, and future all have the letters of God's name. From that, we learn that for God, all of time is simultaneous. And when we reach a certain level of consciousness, so we can also experience the past in the present and the future in the present as well. Okay, so now I want to give over another idea that Rav Ginsburg gives over, a very, very important idea. So we're going back to this idea from Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev that everyone has the possibility of having a vision of the third temple. So Rav Ginsburg says, well, what does that mean exactly? So he says, well, we could envision the temple standing on Har HaBayit. We can visualize the Kohanim dressed in their special clothing. We can even visualize and smell the incense. We could hear the music of the Levim. In other words, we could have this all-encompassing visualization of what the third temple will be. So Rav Ginsburg, so halavai, I'll say, would it be that we could all actually have that experience this coming Shabbos? Halavai. Rav Ginsburg says that's all on the outside. Chitzonius. That's an outside vision. He says, so what did Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berdichev really want us to experience? So he explains the original verse that is the commandment to build a tabernacle is Asuli Mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make for me a holy place, and I will dwell in their midst. And I think everyone knows the Torah. It doesn't say in its midst, meaning in the Mishkan, but in their midst, in the heart and soul and mind of each and every person. That is the ultimate Mishkan. That's the ultimate temple. And so Rav Ginsburg said that's the inner vision of this Shabbos. The inner vision is to envision Mashiach consciousness when God or as Isaiah says, where the knowledge of God will cover the earth like the waters cover the sea, that will envision not just a physical temple, and I'll say again, Halavai, we would have that kind of vision. And Halavai, we will see it in reality in the physical material world. But still, that's still the outside of the original intent of God to dwell within each and every person. That's the vision, our own vision of a kind of consciousness that we could have in order to have this vision of the third temple this coming Shabbat. Now, I just want to add one more idea, and I'll try to do it quickly. That, well, what part of our consciousness will be able to access this kind of vision? So there is a story in the book of Daniel. Daniel had many, many visions. The whole book is full of his visions. And in the 10th chapter, and this is part of a whole series of visions he has, Daniel says, he starts to describe what he's seeing in the vision. And it says, this is in the 7th verse of the 10th chapter, and it says, I, Daniel, alone saw the vision. For the men who were with me did not see the vision. In other words, he was with a group of people, and he gets his vision, but he's very aware that no one else is getting this vision. But look what it says. But a great trembling fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision. And then he continues. So the question asked is, if these people didn't have the vision, why were they trembling? What did they run away from? So the Gemara asks this question, and the Gemara answers, their Mazal saw the vision. So what does that mean? That's what I want to explain. And you'll see how it's going to connect to what Levi Yitzhak of Berdichev was talking about. So, and here, I'll be honest, this could be a whole class about what is Mazal. What does it mean their Mazal saw and they became scared? They didn't see the vision, but a part of their consciousness just intuitively became scared of the energy that was happening there, and they fled. So Mazal means a lot of things. One of the things, these are the words of Rav Ginsburg, on the highest level, a person's Mazal is the hidden purpose of a person's life, which directs a person during their life. We always say that every person is born with a purpose. We all have a purpose here in this world. Many people struggle their whole lives trying to figure out what their purpose is. Other people figure out what their purpose is, but maybe don't know how to express it or manifest it. Happy is the person who knows what their mission in this world is and is actively directing their life to fulfill this. Rav Ginsburg says that ultimately is what Mazal is. But what else does Mazal mean? Mazal comes from the word nozel, to flow. And so this is like we always say, that only actually a small part of our soul is manifest in the body. The majority of our soul, in modern psychology, we'll call it the unconscious, the subconscious, the supraconscious. But that is a part of the soul that we'll say hovers over us. That is the Mazal, the part of the soul that is hovering over us that we may or may not connect to. And that's why this idea of ultimately the Mazal is the mission of a person. And when we connect to it, so then we draw it down, nozel, it flows into us. But on the simple idea, the literal idea, Mazal means an astronomical sign. The stars are called Mazalot. And in fact, when we say Mazal Tov, the original meaning, even within Judaism, was the stars should look favorably on you. This is a whole other discussion that the sages understood that the stars, the planets, had tremendous effect on the world and human beings. But they did not determine our fate. That is always left in our hands. Just like there are so many influences in our life, peer pressure, DNA, nature, nurture, society, media, a whole list of influences. But ultimately, we have to make decisions. And if we don't make the decisions, then the Mazalot do rule over us. So that's why the Gemara says, Ein Mazal Yisrael. There is influence of the stars, but not ultimately. Ein Mazal, there is no Mazal for Israel because our free will can overcome any of the influences of the stars. That's what God says to Avram when he takes him outside. And he says, look up at the stars. And if you can count them, that will be how many your seed will be. Rashi explains there, he says, and it says, God took him outside. He took him outside. So Rashi says, what does it mean he took him outside? So the simple meaning, he took him outside of the tent and he showed him the stars. But Rashi explains, he says, God says to Avram, go outside of your astrological predictions, which are telling you, rightfully so, that you and Sarah cannot have children. According to the stars, you cannot have children. Biologically, you cannot have children. But that's Avram and Sarai. Avraham and Sarah can have children. So this is the explanation of Rashi. And then of course the Baal Shem Tov came around and says, what does it mean? Ein Mazal Yisrael. There is no influence of the stars in Israel. He says the Ein Sof is the Mazal of Israel. The infinite one, the Ein Sof. Ein Mazal Yisrael. Read it. Ein Sof hu hamazal Yisrael. That's from the Baal Shem Tov. But then I'll add one last thing here, and then we're going to bring it back to the Shabbat of vision. And like I said, this literally could be an entire class trying to understand what Mazal is. There are things that our sages tell us, some of the most important things do not come from merit. They come from our Mazal, meaning from predetermined forces. So now here we have a tremendous paradox here. On one hand, the sages say, Ein Mazal Yisrael. There is no Mazal Yisrael. On the other hand, they say, having children, Parnasa, what's the third? There's a third thing. you'll excuse me, it escapes me now. Someone could put it in the chat. We'll discuss it later. There's a third thing. It says does not depend on merit, depends on Mazal. Meaning that we're not here for the first time. We all bring a suitcase with us, a big package with us. And these things are predetermined. These things are predetermined. But it never will overcome totally our free will. And that's one of the secrets of reincarnation, that we're born with, like I say, a big package that we come into this world. But that package does not determine what we will do in this lifetime. It's like the DNA. The DNA creates the parameters of a person's height and width and propensity for hundreds of different things. But it's a context. And depending, let's say we eat very, very good and we exercise. So another person with the same propensity eats terrible, doesn't exercise, is stressed all the time. So two different outcomes are going to happen, even though within the boundaries, it could go either way. So the DNA also is a very determinant of what happens to us, but it never totally determines, never. So the Mazal, that's the little bit of the paradox of the Mazal. There is like we say, the stars do have an influence. They do, and if we don't use our free will in the correct way, then the stars will have much more of an influence than they should. So now let's just bring this back to the idea of from Daniel, that all the people with him, they didn't have the vision, but their Mazal felt something. They all trembled and ran away. So when Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev is saying that we all have the opportunity to have a vision of the third temple, the way we could understand it is it's the collective consciousness, the collective Mazal of Israel that has the opportunity to have this vision. It's not, we could sit down and say, oh, Levi Yitzchak said we can envision the temple. So we sit and we meditate and we try to envision the temple. I'll say again, halavai, we do that. Halavai, and we take that minute or two or 5 or 10 and actually sit this Shabbos and try to imagine a world where a temple could be built and exist. But really on a deeper level, it's talking about the collective consciousness of Israel was given over by the prophets, this idea of the universal vision of mankind. That is what will allow us to see what Levi Yitzchak was talking about, this vision of the third temple, of Mashiach, of a rectified world, because it's in our consciousness, but in a very deep level. It's what gives us strength. And I'll just end by, again, connecting really what we've been talking about, especially this idea of Eze Chacham Haro'eh Nolad. Who is the wise one? The one who can see what will be born from this moment. So as we're all feeling, the words all I can say is we're just waiting for all hell to break loose here. But deep down inside, it's like this is going to bring us closer to Mashiach. can't tell you exactly how. I don't think anyone can. We don't have prophets now, but many people are feeling that. Many people are feeling like it's just everything the prophet said would happen is happening. And right now it might look bleak or dangerous or whatever, but it's like the sages said, Mashiach is born on Tisha B'Av. When we're sitting on the floor and mourning, that's when Mashiach will be born. So let us fully expect that this is the reality of what's happening right now. And Bezrat Hashem, it won't be just a vision. Bezrat Hashem, every day we're getting closer and closer to Mashiach, closer and closer to how light will overcome evil. And Bezrat Hashem, this Tisha B'Av will turn into a day of joyous celebration.